Aziz Ansari back with his first special since the allegations came out early last year, 2018, about sexually aggressive behavior. The special is called Right Now, dropped on Netflix Tuesday, July 9th. Dave, I know that you saw him live. Obviously, no recordings because that's kind of been the MO for these shows. You have to put the phones away in the box. Uh, how did you feel about the special compared to what you saw?
Yeah, so I saw him in the Boston area back in, when was that? February, March, something like that. And oh, I just want to figure out exactly when that was. Yeah, February. And honestly, this was a very, very similar routine. A lot of these jokes may have been referenced online leading up to this special, but it was obviously a much tighter routine because they shot this over 3 nights in Brooklyn in May. So you had, you know, 40 more shows, 50 more shows to hone in on this routine. And there were some jokes that I heard that weren't in this one, as well as some new ones, just a few. So, but overall, yeah, it seems like he was definitely building to this moment, very much thought out. So some of the jokes didn't quite hit as hard for me because I had already heard them before, especially in a live setting. That's come to be expected. But what did you think coming at most of this for the first time?
Yeah, it's interesting. He starts off the show right almost with this whisper, and it's a very stylistic or a very stylized comedy special because you have Spike Jones directing it. The cameraman is literally almost in Aziz's face. He's sitting on this stool, a lot different than his usual, like up tempo, walking around, kind of eccentric, erratic energy. Um, and he starts off almost like I said with this whisper, and he's talking about Hassan Minaj and being confused for him, and then reluctantly saying, "Yeah, that's me. I'm Master of None guy. Treat yourself guy." And then he said, "Oh, and you had that sexual aggression allegation." He's like, "Oh no, that was Hassan," and then he goes into this whole thing about his experience with it, about how he felt so alone, how he felt so scared, but mostly just felt terrible for the girl and her experience in it. But maybe there was some good that came out of it because he knows it's caused some other people to reflect, and it kind of sets the tone. He shifts it very quickly, but that's obviously at the center of all of this. And even when he veers off into some of that patented silliness that I think we all come to know and appreciate, and has helped make him a very public a comedian, a very successful comedian. It's always kind of at the forefront of the special is these allegations and how that kind of hangs over his head throughout. This was what I found really interesting. How did you feel like he handled all of that throughout the special?
Yeah, so I had heard obviously
Mhm.
a pretty similar variation of that when I saw him, and that I got picked up on culture sites when he first gave that little speech. I think it was in a New York City show, I want to say. And yeah, I thought it came off as very thoughtful. I know it's interesting because read any reviews as they started to come out on this special. Um, this allegation from Babe.net is obviously framing everyone's consumption of this special and the discourse around it, and I think it should obviously. Um, and the key to I think take away is because some people um, are just like very angry that Aziz is being given another platform by Netflix and is uh, seemingly found his regular success once again with a global tour the past few months. And I think his thoughts on the matter and how he shared them come off as very thoughtful and remorseful. He doesn't come across as defensive or bitter at all.
Mhm.
Um, and that's contrary to the way someone like Louis C.K. has carried himself recently.
Yeah.
And also reminds you once again that Aziz, what he purportedly did was not the same as someone who was a predator.
Mhm.
Like he's been wrapped up in the Me Too movement, but it's very much in a gray area because the interpretation of the severity of the situation depends on who you ask, whether that's male or woman, you know?
Yep.
And it's a quite polarizing thing. There are some people that think it should be totally dismissed, and some people think it should be totally canceled. And I think obviously it's a little in the middle. You shouldn't totally dismiss it. And he's right to point out that overall, the uh, greater talking point around what he did, something that wasn't actually criminal, you know,
Mhm.
still is wrong. And I think a lot of people perhaps have done that unwillingly. And I think he is right to say that that is some kind of positive takeaway. Now, some people won't be happy with that, and I think a common thing I've seen is, well, he could be handling it worse, but it's a bit of a low bar. And I think ultimately you just kind of have to judge him for the way he's carried himself, especially given the other people or he's looped around with. So I like the way he sprinkled it in both in the beginning and in the end of the
Mhm.
special, and also because as the jokes progress and we get more to a lighter tone, he's talking a lot about textbook things he's talked about before, generally, modern observations, of course. And part of that is, woke culture, right?
Mhm.
And he doesn't come across as like bitter or mad about woke culture in the way it affected him. Again, that's something that Louis C.K. has, kind of railed against recently in his return. So, yeah, I like the way he handled it. I think it was done pretty tastefully and honestly.
Yeah, it's hard, I think, um, to look at a special like this because it's so rehearsed, and you can tell it's so rehearsed. And other than the few times things seem spontaneous, like the Justin Tyler moment, or like the girl in the crowd who yells "funny" and like Aziz like calls that out. You can tell that he knew all the beats, that he had been practicing this, and because of that, it can kind of make these thoughts, even though they are genuine, seem a bit rehearsed and seem a bit like they aren't coming necessarily from the heart in that moment. But I do think that what he gets at and the way he presents it and the tone he takes with it, bringing it down to that serious level, um, not trying to really make light of it, especially at the beginning or end. And even when he does touch on some headier topics later, I think he always kind of brings it back to himself in ways. And I think he handled it as well as anyone in the situation could have. Um, it's such a difficult line to walk,
Right.
because of all the points that you made before. Um, I I thought that he shifted very quickly into the set, which I actually was glad because, I mean, first of all, I had to turn the volume on my TV up like 20 extra decibels just to hear him. He was talking so low, but also because I wanted to get back into Aziz and hear more of the jokes he had to say. And I felt like the jokes he delivered were good observations. I do think he whiffed a little bit, especially when talking about like R. Kelly and Michael Jackson, in terms of bringing that back to himself and how the way fans might be perceiving the things that R. Kelly and Michael Jackson are doing he might be receiving some of that treatment in certain ways because of people just going to the whole cancel culture right away and not really looking further into the facts. But a lot of the jokes landed really well, and I don't think he's missed a beat comedically. And if anything, I feel like he's matured in terms of how he tells these stories and tells the jokes and the observations he's going through. How did you feel about like the content of the jokes throughout?
Yeah, and speaking to the maturity of it all, towards the back half when he starts talking about his grandmother with Alzheimer's and then seeing
Mm,
his parents and not seeing them enough, uh, kind of feels like the more learned worldly Aziz that perhaps we got touched on around Master of None season 2. He definitely feels like a different guy than he was when he was selling out MSG like
mhm.
only half a dozen comics ever have, And I think the way it just really felt like he was sincere with a lot of like the jokes. Like I actually felt like he kind of like believed the way he was feeling. Like some of this, I thought like the progressive Candy Crush stuff I saw when he performed. Like I think that's just really funny stuff. But he's not like coming at it in like a bitter way, you know. and he's also not being like a both sides police kind of guy either. It just kind of feels like he's just coming like from his perspective about like there's a time and a place for when to discuss things, like when he makes the brunch comment, stuff like that. Yeah, so I think overall, like a lot of the jokes, yeah, they just feel smarter just because they've changed because Aziz, as he said, has changed as well now that he's in his mid-30s. I like the Crazy Rich Asians joke.
Yeah. 12 points lower. 12 points lower.
The swastika pizza one. I saw that one live.
That
one worked with the clapping one in my venue as well. Yeah, it's but like also like, you know, kind of like a classic Aziz things, you know, things don't just become racist when the white people figure it out, you know? And I think that was kind of a smart way to touch on Apu in Simpsons, something, you know, like speaks back to the Indians on TV, Master of None episode. You know, he's talked about this stuff before. And I think people have come at him to directly denounce the Simpsons creators and the way they've handled that. I think he just did it in his own way, you know? And I think the whole point of, it was fucked up 30 years ago. We just didn't have a platform back then. You know, it's cutting, but it's smart and it's correct. So I think, just overall the maturity and more, I guess, top level observations stand out. And so you didn't think the R. Kelly, Michael Jackson stuff landed as well? Because it is an interesting juxtaposition of how people are much more apt to dump R. Kelly than MJ, and how much of that is just because of the music quality difference, you know?
No, I actually think the jokes around it landed very well. I think especially when he started poking fun at himself in terms of all the times he mentioned R. Kelly and how much he loved R. Kelly. I thought that was hilarious. And also how he kept going back to what he like Jeff Greenberg or whatever he named that guy, or whatever the guy's name was. And you know, how he canceled Michael Jackson, but it took like 1,000 kids before he was willing to like draw that line, you know? I thought that was funny. Where I felt like he just missed a little bit is because connecting back to himself and the things that he's experienced. You know, I felt like there was a bit of a through line. He could have kind of pulled it back together a little bit more, but I also can understand him not wanting to necessarily so closely associate himself with those two, especially with the year that they both had. Michael Jackson obviously not here to experience it, and R. Kelly very much experiencing it.
I've had a rough year as it is.
You know, just to go back to one joke that probably the joke I laughed the hardest at was when he was talking about how he was the first Indian person he saw on MTV. But he said, well, actually the second, the bassist from No Doubt, but you know how that band plays it, Don't Speak. And just the way he delivered that, I was like dying on my couch. I thought that was so good. You know, an interesting thing I was talking about with my girlfriend Julianne as we watched it. Do you think that this is going to be kind of like what kicks off the next phase of like shows and Aziz content moving forward? He has, even though he's been touring internationally and doing these like somewhat underground shows, he's been pretty dormant, you know, especially in the public eye. I mean, he's been doing shows, but not as that's not as accessible as something like Master of None, which is on a platform almost most people in the United States have access to.
So he did a lot of shows the past few months, all over the place, not just major cities, really. And now that he's done that run and been seen by scores of people, and now he has a front page Netflix special once again. He's definitely back in that sense. But if you remember, even before everything hopped off last year, his social media game went off a cliff and just really became promotional. So he kind of felt like he was kind of out of the loop by design. Point back to Master of None, a show that Netflix immediately said, yes, we'll do it again if Aziz and Alan want to make it. And they didn't really comment much on it. They're like, yeah, maybe one day, you know? So I think now he's in a moment, you know, and Lena Waithe has come in support of him, of course. And I part of me thinks maybe the Master of None season 3 call happens this year. Like we'll find out if it's coming back at all. But then again, maybe he'll just keep it cool again. I don't know. He had his head down all of last year for reasons that he didn't choose to, obviously. But now, maybe he has other projects in mind. I'm not really sure. But yeah, it just kind of feels like he's just kind of like a superstar that's likes to pull back a little bit. It's kind of, connects to a lot of his humor now about the internet and everything, and just how he's, I don't know, and like the finer moments that you let slip by. It kind of feels like he's shifted in his celebrity. So whether that affects his creative output, who can say? We're not really going to know anything until he officially wants us to.
Yeah, I think, especially with the way he ended the special, talking about wanting to be more in the moment, wanting to enjoy things more. I could see him dropping this, taking a little bit of time for himself. And like you said, kind of just making projects at the pace that he feels, because he doesn't really need to be working if he doesn't want to be. And I would love to get another season of Master of None. And I think especially with what he's gone through, I feel like he could, he has that life experience that I think he could make an interesting television season about. But I think he probably also would want to handle it very delicately and, thoughtfully. So probably won't be hearing from him too soon, but we'll be anticipating when we do. What about Spike Jonze? I mean, just kind of, I was surprised that he directed it. I want to see him making more movies.
Yeah, he's only made like a few movies since the 90s. It's kind of annoying. Like, he makes so many music videos and stuff like this. Yeah, man, Spike Jonze, work more.
Seriously, yeah. What, Her was his last major?
Yeah, 2013.
6 years ago. Man, he needs to make another movie, because every time he does too, it's so interesting. Even his music videos are really interesting. Oh, I forgot he did that whole video short for the Arcade Fire.
Didn't need to do that. Let's be real.
I mean, it was The Suburbs. That's a good album. LCD Sound System, Jay-Z, Kanye. Oh, he did the Otis video? Wow.
I didn't know that.
Iconic.
Yep.
There's some good stuff on this filmography. Anyways, Aziz, we're glad he's back. Check out the special.